There is a weight to your wilderness that you've been trying to shake. You've been calling it a delay, a punishment, maybe even a spiritual drought. But what if I told you it's none of those things? What if your wilderness is actually a holy place, sacred ground where heaven is waiting to reveal something deeper about who you are and who God is to you? You didn't stumble into this season by accident. God led you here not to abandon you, but to awaken you. And in this place that feels barren and silent, He's asking for one thing: your worship. Not the kind you give when you feel strong, but the kind that flows from your weakness. Because your wilderness worship shakes the heavens. And by the time you finish hearing this word, you'll see that what you called emptiness, God is calling an encounter. You see, we often look for God in the crowd, in the fire, in the loud praise, and the overflowing moments. But some of the greatest revelations of His presence come in places where everything else has been stripped away. The wilderness removes what you've been depending on so that God can become your only source. And when you feel like you're surrounded by nothing, this is where worship becomes real, where your voice carries a sound it didn't carry before, where your hallelujah doesn't come from comfort, it comes from commitment. The enemy wants to convince you that this season is evidence that you've been forgotten. But heaven sees this wilderness as proof that you're trusted. Trusted to praise when the blessings aren't visible. Trusted to declare His name even when you don't feel the wind. Trusted to stand on the word when the feeling is gone. That trust transforms your wilderness into a holy altar. You may not realize it, but you're building something eternal right where you stand. The wilderness is not meant to kill you, it's meant to clarify you. It's meant to strip you of all the false identities you've picked up and bring you back to the one place of truth, worship, true worship, not performance, not ritual, not religion. Just you, your voice, your tears, your prayers, and the presence of a faithful God who has never stopped watching over you. He's been walking with you the entire time. Even when the path disappeared and the nights got longer, if you're waiting for your wilderness to be over before you worship, you'll miss the breakthrough that only worship can unlock. Your worship is not just a sound, it's a signal. It tells heaven you still believe. It tells the enemy you're not quitting. And it tells your spirit that even here, especially here, God is worthy. When Paul and Silas were chained in a prison, they didn't wait for release before they praised. They worshiped in the middle of confinement, and the prison had to respond. So must your wilderness. And here's the truth: the way you worship in the wilderness prepares you for the weight of your next season. If you can carry glory in the dry place, you can be trusted with it in the abundant place. Because worship in the wilderness isn't casual, it's consecrated. It doesn't rely on sound systems or song lyrics. It doesn't wait for an audience. It's the worship that God Himself leans in to hear. So today I challenge you, don't run from your wilderness. Don't silence your praise because your surroundings feel dry. Don't stop worshiping because you feel unseen. This is the ground God has chosen to meet you. This is your burning bush moment. What feels like isolation is actually divine intimacy. Your wilderness is holy. So lift your voice, lift your hands, lift your heart. Heaven is listening. And when you learn to worship here, there's no place you can't find Him. The wilderness is not your punishment, it's your preparation ground. It doesn't feel like it when you're in it, though. When you're walking through a season where the doors don't open, the voices go silent, and your prayers feel like they're hitting the ceiling, it's easy to believe you've done something wrong. But what if this dry place, this confusing place, this lonely stretch of life is actually the very location where God has set aside sacred space to build something in you that couldn't be built anywhere else? The wilderness may seem barren on the outside, but it's rich in divine activity on the inside. Heaven does its most strategic work in hidden places. You are not being punished, you are being prepared. Not for where you've been, but for where you're going. And preparation, if it's going to be powerful, must also be private. In Scripture, God consistently uses the wilderness as a refining place. It's where he separates voices, breaks dependencies, and confronts identities. It's where he takes the time to strip away everything that could later compete with his voice in your life. Think about it. The wilderness is the place he took Moses before calling him to lead a nation. It's the place where David learned to shepherd sheep before shepherding Israel. It's the place where even Jesus was led before stepping into the fullness of his earthly assignment. You see, the wilderness is not about disqualification. It's about development. There are some lessons you can only learn in the absence of noise. There are dimensions of worship, trust, and obedience that only emerge when you're left with nothing but your faith. This season that feels like lack is actually full of opportunity to grow deeper in God, to learn the sound of his whisper, and to respond to his leading without the distraction of crowds. In the wilderness, you find out if your worship was real or just a reaction to convenience. You discover whether your faith was dependent on external affirmations or rooted in an unshakable identity. God doesn't bring you into the wilderness to humiliate you. He brings you there to purify you. He's teaching you how to walk with him without needing everything around you to affirm that walk. Sometimes we ask God for elevation, for platforms, for purpose, and he answers by pulling us away. That pulling away feels contradictory, but it's actually intentional. You cannot carry public weight without private integrity. You cannot speak with authority until you've learned to be silent in the secret place. And the secret place is built in the wilderness. It's built in the early mornings when no one sees your tears. It's built in the late nights when no one responds to your texts. It's built when the applause fades and the crowd disappears. It's in that sacred space where God shapes your spiritual spine, your ability to stand when it doesn't make sense and still declare, "You are good and I trust you." There's nothing wasted in your wilderness. Every delay, every unanswered prayer, every closed door is doing a work deeper than you realize. You may not see the fruit yet, but the roots are growing. And strong roots are what sustain you in stormy seasons. When the time comes for you to step into what you've been prepared for, the world may see the fruit, but only heaven and you will know the pain that went into the process. That's the beauty of the wilderness. It gives you history with God. It gives you a testimony that can't be manufactured or borrowed. It gives you an anchor that holds, not because you've read about him, but because you've met him in the quiet, in the questioning, in the place where no one else was watching. So the next time you feel tempted to resent your wilderness, pause, look around, listen for the whisper, worship with tears in your eyes if you must. Because this place is holy, this ground is sacred, and though it feels like nothing is growing, everything that matters is your character, your capacity, your discernment, your resilience. God is preparing you for what you prayed for. He's just doing it in a way you didn't expect. The wilderness is not the end of your story. It's the chapter before the breakthrough. And when you come out of it, you won't just come out stronger, you'll come out surer, deeper, and ready. Ready not only to walk in your calling, but to carry it with grace, wisdom, and glory. God hides in dry places to deepen your dependence and refine your voice. That may not be the way you expected him to work, but that is often how heaven moves through contradiction that produces transformation when you are in a dry place, when the familiar wells stop flowing, when the people who used to pour into you fall silent, when the spiritual rhythms you once relied on feel empty. It's not because God has disappeared. It's because he's repositioning you. In his wisdom, he sometimes hides, not to confuse you, but to cultivate a deeper kind of pursuit. He steps back, not because he's distant, but because he wants you to reach beyond routine and into revelation. The dryness is not punishment, it is preparation. It is the ground where your reliance shifts from people to presence, from feelings to faith, from comfort to calling. In dry places, the noise dies down, and in the absence of noise, your soul becomes sensitive to sound. It's in these moments that you begin to recognize the difference between inspiration and encounter. In a dry place, you can't lean on yesterday's revelation. You can't run on spiritual autopilot. You are forced to listen for a new word, a fresh wind, a deeper instruction. And that sensitivity begins to refine your voice, not just the voice that speaks publicly, but the voice that declares truth in private, the voice that worships even when it's hoarse, the voice that says yes when the outcome is uncertain, the voice that says, God, I still believe, when every external marker tells you nothing is changing. You see, dryness doesn't mean God has stopped speaking. It often means he's changing the language. When he wants to mature your spirit, he stops answering the prayers you're used to and starts awakening the prayers he placed in you long before the foundation of the world. And that awakening happens in wilderness spaces where there are no filters, no distractions, just raw encounters. This kind of encounter requires brokenness. It requires honesty. It requires desperation. And all of that is found when life becomes silent enough for your true voice to rise up. Dryness has a way of purifying what you believe. When everything feels like it's falling apart, you find out whether your faith was built on emotion or encounter. And if you let him, God will use the dryness to anchor you. He will teach you how to trust him, not just for what he can give, but for who he is. The dry place becomes sacred, not because it's comfortable, but because it breaks the illusion that you ever had control. It exposes every idol and confronts every crutch. It shows you what you've really been depending on. And it lovingly invites you back to the simplicity of God alone being enough. This is not just a season, it's a school. You are being taught how to worship without needing the stage, how to pray without needing the perfect words, how to believe without needing constant affirmation. You are being trained in stillness, in resilience, in discernment, and most of all, you are being reminded that God is more interested in your character than your comfort, because only the voice that's been refined in the dry place, only the heart that's learned dependence in the wilderness can steward the weight of destiny without being crushed by it. There's a type of intimacy you only gain when everything else dries up. That's why God doesn't remove the dryness immediately. He uses it to deepen your roots. He lets the soil crack a little so that your spirit will press deeper into the well that never runs dry. In those quiet moments when it feels like no one sees you, heaven is watching. Heaven is waiting. Heaven is taking note of every time you choose to worship instead of complain. Every time you show up in prayer, even when you don't feel anything. That faith, tested and tried, is precious to God. It becomes your offering. And offerings given in the dry place carry weight in the supernatural. So if you are in a season that feels dry, don't run from it. Don't rush through it. Receive what it's here to teach you. Let it refine you. Let it strip you. Let it silence the lies that said you had to perform to be loved or achieve to be chosen. You are already chosen. You are already loved. You are already seen. And the God who allowed you to enter this dry place will walk you through it and out of it with a voice that carries heaven authority and a dependence that can never be. This is the ground where true worship is born, not out of surplus, but out of surrender. And that is the worship God treasures most. Worship in the wilderness carries a fragrance that only brokenness can release. It is unlike any other kind of worship. It doesn't come from the overflow of answered prayers or the mountaintop of celebration. It comes from the depths of desperation, the hollow space where you feel abandoned, misunderstood, or forgotten. It rises not because everything is right, but because in spite of everything being wrong, your heart still chooses God. It's a fragrance formed not in comfort, but in crushing. And yet it is the one offering that heaven receives with the greatest reverence. When you are in the wilderness, nothing feels familiar. The routines that once brought clarity feel empty. The people who once affirmed your calling are silent. And in that space, God invites you into a deeper level of worship. One that is not built on what you feel, but on who He is. One that comes not from emotional highs, but from spiritual truth. This is where fragrance is born, not from perfection, but from pain that has been placed at the altar. The wilderness strips everything away. It exposes what we've depended on, what we've idolized, what we've hidden behind. It does not ask for performance. It demands authenticity. In that raw and unfiltered place, you discover a worship that isn't rehearsed or rehearsed. It's real. It's the kind of worship that doesn't require instruments or microphones, only a surrendered heart and a whispered, Lord, I'm still here. And somehow that whisper carries more weight in heaven than the loudest shouts from the stage. It carries the sound of trust when nothing makes sense. It carries the echo of obedience when the outcome is unclear. That sound, the one birthed in brokenness, is the sound that causes chains to break and atmospheres to shift. Wilderness worship is sacred because it's costly. You give it without the promise of return. You give it not because your hands are full, but because your heart refuses to let go of who God is, even when you don't understand what He's doing. It is the offering of oil from a crushed jar, not a polished one. And it is that oil that anoints, that oil that heals, that oil that marks your worship as holy. In the wilderness, you learn to sing with tears in your eyes. You learn to lift your hands even when you feel weak. You learn to speak life into your own soul when the silence of heaven feels unbearable. And every time you do, that fragrance of broken worship rises before the throne like incense, and God leans in to receive it. There is something heaven honors about worship that is not manufactured, not choreographed, not dependent on circumstances. That kind of worship builds altars in barren places. It declares, even if I don't see the promise yet, I will still bless your name. It says, even when I feel forgotten, I will not forget you. And that declaration, made in the wilderness, shapes your spirit in a way that success never can. It makes you into a worshiper that is not shaken by seasons. It gives your voice depth, your faith weight, your presence authority. Because worship birthed in brokenness cannot be manipulated or moved by applause. It's rooted too deep. It knows too much. It's tasted God's faithfulness in famine and will not be swayed when the famine stretches longer than expected. When you give God your worship in the wilderness, you are building history with Him. You are writing a testimony that cannot be taken away from you. You are forming a well in your spirit that others will draw from one day. And when you come out of that wilderness, and you will carry something you didn't have before. You will carry an anointing that didn't come from books or platforms, but from the altar of your pain. You will carry a fragrance that tells the world you've been with God when no one else was watching. That's what makes wilderness worship so powerful. It's hidden, but it is holy. It's quiet, but it is loud in the spirit. It's low, but it touches the heights of heaven. So don't wait until you feel strong to worship. Don't wait until the breakthrough comes. Don't wait until you understand the purpose of your wilderness. Worship now. Worship while you're waiting. Worship with questions in your heart and hope in your voice. Because that kind of worship rewrites atmospheres. It shifts things in the unseen. It releases angels on assignment. It births oil that will sustain you and others in seasons to come. This is your wilderness, but more than that, this is your holy place. And your worship here will echo into eternity. Your hidden season is holy. What feels like silence is divine instruction. It's easy to believe that if nothing is happening publicly, then nothing meaningful is happening at all. But that's a lie the enemy whispers to make you doubt your worth and discredit your process. The truth is, some of the most significant moves of God happen in places no one else sees. Hiddenness is not rejection, it is refinement. You are not being punished, you are being preserved. God is not hiding you because He's finished with you. He's hiding you because He's preparing something inside of you that cannot be built in the open. And though it feels like silence, God is speaking. He's just speaking in a way that requires stillness to hear. He is teaching you to recognize the sound of His instruction, not through noise, but through intimacy. Every quiet moment is a classroom. Every unseen decision is a seed being planted. And one day, what has been nurtured in the hidden place will bloom with a weight of glory only heaven can explain. We often equate visibility with validation. We think that if people see it, applaud it, or affirm it, then it must be real. But God does his most holy work behind the curtain. He does it in obscurity so that when the moment comes for you to be revealed, you are not just ready, you are rooted. The hidden season is where you become strong in silence. It's where your character is shaped without applause. It's where your identity is sealed without affirmation. You learn that you are who God says you are, not because a crowd confirmed it, but because his word sustained you in the dark. You worship not to be seen, but because he sees you. You pray not for public breakthrough, but for private intimacy. And that kind of foundation cannot be shaken because it's built in consecration. God often hides those he is going to use the most. Before David ever ruled a kingdom, he worshiped in fields. Before Esther ever stood before a king, she fasted in secret. Before Jesus began his ministry, he spent 30 years in silence. If God didn't rush their preparation, why do you think he'd rush yours? There's a sacredness in seasons of silence that we must learn to honor. Instead of resisting it, we must recognize it. Instead of running from it, we must sit in it. Because hiddenness is not the absence of purpose, it's the maturing of it. It's where God stretches your spirit, deepens your roots, and purifies your motives. He removes every distraction so that you don't confuse your calling with your platform. He teaches you how to obey without being seen. That obedience becomes the oil that will mark your public moments with undeniable favor. When you're hidden, you begin to hear God differently. The world's noise fades and his voice becomes clearer. He speaks through the word in a way that feels tailor-made for your soul. He speaks through silence that makes you wrestle with truth. And in that wrestling, you are changed. You stop looking for him in the sensational and start finding him in the simple. The ordinary moments become extraordinary, not because they're loud, but because they're laced with the presence of the one who never left. And that awareness is what gives you the ability to carry his glory with humility. Because in a hidden place, pride dies, self-promotion loses its appeal. You no longer need to be seen, you just need to be close. This season may not look like you imagined. It may feel like delay, like disappointment, like divine distance. But what you feel and what is true are not always the same. This is not a setback. This is sacred space, and your response to it will determine what comes next. Will you resent being hidden, or will you allow it to make you holy? Will you try to rush what God is trying to refine? Or will you trust the God who knows when the time is right? He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't changed his mind about you. He's just writing a story in secret that will one day be shouted from the rooftops, not for your glory, but for his. So embrace this hidden season. Embrace the quiet prayers, the unseen faithfulness, the unnoticed growth. These are the things that make you unshakable. These are the things that make your voice carry weight. These are the things that turn calling into commissioning. Because when God finally reveals what he's been shaping, no man will be able to take credit for it. They'll look at your life and say, that had to be God. And you'll smile, not because you needed the affirmation, but because you'll know he was there all along, working in the silence, building in the dark, and turning your hidden season into holy ground.